I don't quite understand this whole smart contract thing.
So
I'm too dumb to understand smart contracts.
That's a good line.
Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Elon Musk talked about cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Dogecoin, and more. Let's dive deep into it. Are you ready? Let's go. This comes out of Elon Musk's interview on the Lex Fridman podcast. We're going to go through bits and pieces that tear it apart, show you what's going on and why this matters for cryptocurrency and how this affects the future, not just on Earth, but also on Mars. Listen to this part right here.
Do you think, technologically speaking, there's any room for ideas of smart contracts or so on? Because you mentioned laws. That's an interesting use of things like smart contracts.
So for those who don't know, smart contracts is this idea that you can use cryptocurrencies, blockchain, the technology, to create contracts based on the blockchain itself, and that this somehow allows for contracts to work better than they work in the real world. I think you're going to get a hint. You got it from the beginning of this video. You're going to get a hint here that maybe Elon's not that keen on the smart contract concept. Smart contracts is particularly a thing with Ethereum as a cryptocurrency. There's ideas that smart contracts can work with some other cryptocurrencies, and you're going to see Elon's not impressed.
To implement the laws by which governments function. Like something built on Ethereum, or maybe a Dogecoin that enables smart contracts somehow.
I don't quite understand this whole smart contract thing. I mean,
so
I'm too dumb to understand smart contracts.
That's a good line.
So I'm too dumb to understand smart contracts. The implication here is that the people, first of all, we all know Elon's not dumb. We all know Elon understands the concepts of finance and cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. He understands all this stuff. If he doesn't get the value of smart contracts, what he's really saying is there isn't much value in smart contracts. It's not as good as you think. Now, Elon's going to go on to explain his view on contracts in general.
I mean, my general approach to any kind of like deal or whatever is just make sure there's clarity of understanding. That's the most important thing.
Right.
And just keep any kind of deal very, very short and simple, plain language. And just make sure everyone understands this is the deal. Is it clear? And what are the consequences if various things don't happen? But usually deals are, business deals or whatever are way too long and complex and overly lawyered.
As a lawyer, I can relate to this. Yes, that's true. Lawyers get too involved into contracts. They try to anticipate every eventuality. They throw in a lot of boilerplate from previous contracts. A lot of lawyers, my experience as a litigator, is somebody who actually goes to court sometimes over what the contracts say. A lot of the people who are writing contracts, a lot of lawyers who are writing contracts are not really thinking ahead to how will this play out in court later. And I believe Elon's approach is best. Make the contract as simple and clear as possible. Don't overcomplicate it with a whole bunch of, boilerplate language and other language that we don't really know how this is going to affect things in the future. Focus on what everybody's expectations are. Let's be clear as possible and don't make it crazy. So I think this is really sensible, but he's getting away from the idea. The idea is that smart contracts somehow self-enforce and get rid of lawyers and somehow it works. And I think what Elon's telling you here is pretty straightforward. The smart contract concept is overblown. There's not as much value in it as people think. As an attorney, I can say I've never understood how the smart contract thing is really supposed to work. Practical reality is most contracts have to be enforced in court. Is there some way that this contract's going to be enforced on the blockchain? It seems questionable to me that you're not going to end up in court anyway. Next up, Lex asks Elon about cryptocurrency on Mars. I think this is a really good answer. I have said this before, what Elon answers in one of my previous videos. I talked about this, but listen to how Elon addresses this.
Do you think there's some chance, we've talked about political systems on Mars, that Dogecoin is the official currency of Mars at some point in the future?
Well, I think Mars itself will need to have a different currency because you can't synchronize due to speed of light. Or not easily.
So it must be completely standalone from Earth.
Well, yeah, because Mars is at closest approach, it's 4 light minutes away roughly. And then at furthest approach, it's roughly 20 light minutes away, maybe a little more.
What Elon's talking about here is what happens with cryptocurrencies is the blockchain updates every so often. And ideally, the blockchain updates frequently, like once a second or once every 5 seconds, so your transactions clear quickly. With Bitcoin, I think blockchain updates have been slower in the past, but because there are times when the Earth and Mars are 20 light minutes apart, there's no way of having a common cryptocurrency that's updating the blockchain at the same time because the Martian transactions are so far away. It would take too long for them to update on the blockchain. So Mars basically has to have its own blockchain if it's going to use cryptocurrency. He'll talk more about that.
So you can't really have something synchronizing, if you got a 20-minute speed of light issue, if it's got a 1-minute blockchain. It's not going to synchronize properly. I don't know if Mars would have a cryptocurrency as a thing, but probably seems likely. But it would be some kind of localized thing on Mars.
And you let the people decide.
Yeah, absolutely. The future of Mars should be up to the Martians.
The future of Mars should be up to the Martians. I think this is also an important point. It may come up somewhere else in the interview. There's this question about, or this concept people have, like, what kind of political system is Elon going to set up on Mars? And Elon's attitude is, the people who live on Mars should set up the political system. He doesn't think he should be making these choices for them. Elon is not going to be one of the first people on Mars. He's hoping to get there at some point, but it's not a major focus. He's got a lot of work to do here on Earth. And I really appreciate his attitude that the people on Mars have to make those decisions for themselves. I'm sure he'll end up playing a role in it, but the practical reality is if Elon's on Earth and Mars is a 3-month journey away, then the Martians have to make the decisions for themselves because Earth can't impose its will on them and can't really help them that much either. The help will be limited. It does sound like Elon thinks there's a role for cryptocurrency on Mars. How effective it will be, what other forms of currency there'll be on Mars, that seems to be up in the air. We'll let the Martians decide that. Next up, this is technical but interesting. Elon talking about how cryptocurrency addresses, from an information theory perspective, money. That money is effectively a database. Listen to this, it's deep. I'll talk more about it after he speaks a little bit, but this is deep stuff about information theory, currencies, money, what it all means.
I think the cryptocurrency thing is an interesting approach to reducing the error in the database that is called money. I think I have a pretty deep understanding of what money actually is on a practical day-to-day basis because of PayPal.
Elon is one of the founders of PayPal, the leading voice behind PayPal. I believe he was the biggest shareholder of PayPal. He worked very deeply on how money worked at PayPal. So people underestimate how much Elon understands about money, and he just briefly dropped that resume bit. He understands money really well.
We really got in deep there. Right now, the money system, actually, for practical purposes, is really a bunch of heterogeneous mainframes running old COBOL.
COBOL is an old programming language that dates back, 40, 50 years, something like that. And it's amazing that it's still being used. It's not a modern programming language that's being taught in university settings. It's just a legacy programming system that still exists. And banks and the Federal Reserve can't seem to get off COBOL. And it's not a very good way to run a computer system to use COBOL, but that's what we're using. I'm not sure whether when he says alt COBOL or old COBOL, I'm not sure what he means by that. So we'll have to figure that one out later.
Okay, you mean literally? That's
literally.
That's literally what's happening
in batch mode. Okay.
In batch mode.
Yeah.
Batch mode is you submit the code and it runs a batch and then finishes and you get the results, as opposed to real-time running computer software real time. It's an old way of doing things that died out a long time ago in almost every other context, but still apparently exists in how banks and the Federal Reserve and government use money.
Pity the poor bastards who have to maintain that code. Okay, that's a pain. That's pain.
Not even Fortran. It's COBOL. Yep,
it's COBOL. And the banks are still buying mainframes in 2021 and running ancient COBOL code. The Federal Reserve is probably even older than what the banks have, and they have an old COBOL mainframe.
So again, they're using old computers. They're still buying an old type of computer that no one else uses anymore. This is the the legacy of an old way of doing things that they can't seem to get out of. And it's comical, but it's, actually sad. And this is why there's so much potential for cryptocurrencies or other approaches to handle money better than the way money is handled now.
The government effectively has editing privileges on the money database. And they use those editing privileges to make more money whenever they want. And this increases the error in the database that is money.
This is a common criticism of what's called fiat currency, that government can just print more money. And one of the advantages of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is there's some limits on how much new money is created. And you end up with what's called an inflation tax. When government prints money, the money in your pocket loses value, and you're effectively paying a tax without even knowing it. Prices go up, or prices don't fall as much as they should, and things cost you more, and that's a form of taxation that you don't necessarily see.
I think money should really be viewed through the lens of information theory. You're kind of like an internet connection. Like, what's the bandwidth? Total bit rate. What is the latency, jitter, packet drop? Errors in the network, communication. Just think of money like that. Basically, I think that's probably the right way to think of it. And then say what system, from an information theory standpoint, allows an economy to function the best. Crypto is an attempt to reduce the error in money that is contributed by governments diluting the money supply as basically a pernicious form of taxation.
It's not that government-controlled money would necessarily be bad. It could be done well, but it never is in history, because ultimately when government officials figure out that they can print money and get away with it, then they print money and get away with it, and it causes all kinds of negative consequences. And this has been going crazy lately. If you Google M1 Fred, you will see that the government, the United States government, and probably other governments, have been printing money like crazy since COVID. It's a crazy volume of money printing, and it's a serious issue, and very few people understand it. And if we were relying on cryptocurrency, they wouldn't be able to do that, and we would have a clearer sense of what money is worth. Because they do this, the value of money becomes unclear, and this affects the economy in all kinds of ways that it's not obvious to see, but when you're looking from a broad perspective, you can see there are serious issues, like the inflation a lot of us are seeing now.
So both policy in terms of with inflation and actual like technological cobalt, like cryptocurrency takes us into the 21st century in terms of the actual systems that allow you to do the transaction, to store wealth, all those kinds of things.
Like I said, just think of money as information. People often will think of money as having power in and of itself. It does not.
Elon goes pretty deep here, but it's a very, very clear explanation of why people misunderstand money and its role and its power. So check this out.
Money is information, and it does not have power in and of itself. Again, applying the physics tools of thinking about things in the limit is helpful. If you are stranded on a tropical island and you have $1 trillion, it's useless because there's no resource allocation. Money is a database for resource allocation.
The economics, the field, is known as the study of the allocation of scarce resources. And the notion is that money allows you to, he's going to talk about this in a minute, but money serves as a way of making transactions more efficient. Instead of barter, you're able to, everything translates to money, and then money translates to everything. And the value of money, the value of items in that currency becomes a price signal of what everything is worth. And if you don't take care of the money well, you lose the value of those price signals.
But there's no resource to allocate except yourself. So money is useless. If you're stranded on a desert island with no food, all the Bitcoin in the world will not stop you from starving. So like just think of money as a database for resource allocation across time and space. And then in what form should that database or data system, what would be most effective?
Elon is just addressing this question, how would you want to have your currency system set up to accurately communicate information about the value of goods and services so that you can allocate resources efficiently? And it's pretty clear that Elon feels that the fiat currency system we're currently using for most of the world's economy is not a good system. It doesn't manage information well, that there's editing, that the computer systems itself are bad. So there's certainly hope for cryptocurrencies solving that problem. There may be other solutions that they didn't really talk about here, but and if you go back to having on a gold standard, that was better because the government couldn't just print money, or at least in theory, they couldn't print money. If you look back over history, governments always find a way to what's called debase the currency, to reduce the value of the currency to their own advantage. It's not new. It's been happening for decades, longer, hundreds of years, thousands of years, maybe. Elon suggests, you want to find a better way of doing it. And next, he's going to tell you that Bitcoin isn't it.
Issue with, say, Bitcoin in its current form, in that the transaction volume is very limited. The latency, the latency for a properly confirmed transaction is too long, much longer than you'd like. So it's actually not great from a transaction volume standpoint or a latency standpoint. So it is perhaps useful as to solve an aspect of the money database problem, which is this sort of store of wealth or an accounting of relative obligations, I suppose. But it is not useful as a currency.
So there's one more point. Number one, latency just means that the blockchain doesn't update fast enough for it to be useful as a currency. And the transaction volume, the Bitcoin system can't handle a high enough volume of transactions to deal with what the needs of a cryptocurrency would be. Third thing he doesn't mention here, he mentions it later, is that the cost of the transaction cost of a Bitcoin transaction is too high. Let's suppose it's $50 for a Bitcoin transaction and you want to buy a $4 loaf of bread. It doesn't work, because if you have to pay $50 for the transaction to buy a $4 loaf of bread, you paid $54 for a loaf of bread. It doesn't make sense. If you're buying a Tesla car for $50,000, the $50 transaction fee isn't that significant. And they'll talk about there's other ways of dealing with it, but fundamentally, it doesn't really work as a currency. And he talks about this as a potential value as a store of wealth. The way I'm listening to Elon, I'm hearing a little bit of skepticism about the importance of that role. He doesn't come off as much of a Bitcoin fan to me. We'll hear more about that later. Okay, so next up here, Elon's going to explain what exactly he means by the role of currency, which I agree with 100%.
Say like you're operating an economy, and you need to have something that allows for the to have efficient value ratios between products and services. So you've got this massive number of products and services, and you can't just barter. It's like that would be extremely unwieldy. You need something that gives you a ratio of exchange between goods and services, and then something that allows you to shift obligations across time, like debt and equity, shift obligations across time. Then what does the best job of that?
So the question becomes, what cryptocurrency, if we're going to use a cryptocurrency, does the best job of communicating value of different items and at the same time communicate value across time? And Elon pretty clearly thinks Bitcoin doesn't serve those roles for the reasons mentioned: transaction volume, transaction costs, and latency. So we're going to get back to Bitcoin a little bit next.
Part of the reason why I think there's some merit to Dogecoin, even though it was obviously created as a joke, is that it actually does have a much higher transaction volume capability than Bitcoin, and the cost of doing a transaction, the Dogecoin fee is very low. Like right now, if you want to do a Bitcoin transaction, the price of doing that transaction is very high, so you could not use it effectively for most things. And nor could it even scale to a high volume. And when Bitcoin was started, I guess around 2008 or something like that, the internet connections were much worse than they are today, like order of magnitude. They're way worse, in 2008. So like having a small block size or whatever is, and a long synchronization time made sense in 2008. But to 2021 or fast forward 10 years, it's like comically low.
So Elon's comparing Dogecoin to Bitcoin. Dogecoin can handle high transaction volume. Dogecoin has low transaction cost. Dogecoin has low latency. And Bitcoin, by comparison, is comical. It made sense when Bitcoin was created back, 12, 15 years ago, whatever. But today, it's just outdated. And you have to look not only at today's internet, but you have to look in the future. And so Dogecoin looks a lot more promising. He's going to talk more about Dogecoin next.
And I think there's some value to having a linear increase in the amount of currency that is generated. So because some amount of the currency, if a currency is too deflationary, or should say, if a currency is expected to increase in value over time, there's reluctance to spend it.
Just real quick here, when he says a linear increase, what that means is the same amount of Dogecoin is created every year. So the supply of Dogecoin continues to grow over time. It's a decreasing share of the total Dogecoin, but it continues to grow, where Bitcoin essentially goes to zero growth at some point. And that makes Bitcoin deflationary. As the economy grows, there's less Bitcoin available, so the value of the Bitcoin grows. And he gets into this point that if you're holding Bitcoin, there's this hesitancy to spend it because you know it's going to be, or you believe it's going to be worth more later, which is less of an issue with Doge.
If a currency is expected to increase in value over time, there's reluctance to spend it. Because you're like, I'll just hold it and not spend it because its scarcity is increasing with time. So if I spend it now, then I will regret spending it. So I will just, hodl it.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had this issue. I bought my Tesla Model 3 with Bitcoin. I happened to buy it when Bitcoin was lower in value. It was a sort of a dip in the value of Bitcoin. So I have some regrets about spending my Bitcoin on my Tesla. I'm really enjoying my Tesla, and the value of my Tesla has also gone up over time because that's what happens with Teslas. But I can perceive that concern that you don't want to spend your Bitcoin because you think it's going to go up in value. And I've heard that from other people, that they don't want to use their Bitcoin because they think it's going up in value. I don't want to sell my Tesla stock because I think it's going to go up in value. Ideally, a currency is not increasing in value that much that you're afraid to spend it. Otherwise, it's not really useful as a currency because you don't use it as a currency because you hold it.
But if there's some dilution of the currency occurring over time, that's more of an incentive to use it as a currency. So Dogecoin, just somewhat randomly, has just a fixed number of sort of coins or hash strings that are generated every year. So there's some inflation, but it's not a percentage base. It's a fixed number. So the percentage of inflation will necessarily decline over time. I'm not saying that it's like the ideal system for a currency, but I think it actually is just fundamentally better than anything else I've seen, just by accident.
So that's the funny thing about Dogecoin, is Dogecoin was created as a joke, and by accident they created what may be the best currency out there. So Elon finds that amusing because it's a meme coin, it's a joke coin, and yet it ends up being useful. And wouldn't it be ironic? He often talks about the irony of Dogecoin becoming the coin of the future, and he makes a really good case for it. So there you have it, Elon on cryptocurrency. He's not apparently a big fan of Bitcoin. He's still a huge fan of Dogecoin. He's not a big believer in smart contracts, which is kind of a knife in the back of Ethereum and some other cryptocurrencies that talk about smart contracts. I don't think Elon is trying to tell people in the cryptocurrency world what to do. He's just expressing his view that if your goal is to make an efficient economy, then you want a cryptocurrency that has low transaction costs, high transaction volume, low latency, and some increase in the currency so people don't hodl it instead of using it. All of that together, it's interesting that Dogecoin makes a lot of sense. And for me, I have not bought Dogecoin, even though I'm a huge Elon fan. I have not persuaded myself to buy Dogecoin yet. I just don't really feel the need to get into that. People buy Dogecoin to hold it. If the goal is to have it as a currency, then you're not buying it to hold it. I just haven't found an easy way to buy Dogecoin yet. And if I have free cash, I buy Tesla stock anyway. So, and I'm going to be investing cash in my pod car startup, and I've got other things I'm going to be spending money on. So Dogecoin just doesn't make my list of things to focus on. We'll see. Very interesting overall. I've got at least 3 more videos coming out of this interview with Lex Fridman. I'll be talking about full self-driving. We'll be talking about SpaceX, Starship, and Raptor. probably at least one more video beyond that. So a lot coming. I want to thank, please check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. The machine that builds the machine, obviously a big shirt. A lot of great shirts, elonbits.com. Thank you to the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden, all my Patreon supporters for helping this channel grow. Thank you to my local supporters, my YouTube channel members, and thank you so much for watching.